We're live. Welcome. We are live. I just said that. We're live. Wait for a few moments for people to come in, just like always. We'll do a little bit of a recap on what I remembered we learned last time. And today we'll talk a little bit about choosing the right node. This should be an episode that we're all going to learn together. If you don't know, this is day 3 of our Zero to Hero Learning Meshtastic series, if you will. And it's a series of live streams, which I'll later put into videos that'll be a little bit more organized. But we need to learn about what the different node types are and why they may or may not benefit us. So I want to welcome everybody here. EOD Kaboom. Hold on a second. EOD Kaboom. Boom. It's right there on the desk, so I don't forget. So thank you very much. If anybody here is unaware, you're tuning in right now, EOD Kaboom sent me a very nice care package full of Meshtastic gear, which is basically allowing us to do this series. Now, don't get me wrong. There were a couple other people who have sent me equipment as well, and we'll definitely get to that, and everybody will get recognition. But man, I gotta say, there's so much to learn with Meshtastic. It's a really simple concept, but when you think you grasp one thing, something else comes up, and maybe that's a good way to start it today. First off, we'll say our hellos. So hello to everybody watching. We got Don, EOD Kaboom, Chris, all the way in Aloha. All the way in Aloha, all the way in Hawaii, Aloha and Mahalo. We got local host in the house. And I saw one more, Jeff, KS0JD. So if you guys don't mind, how many of you already have Meshtastic? And if you have Meshtastic, what device do you use? And if you feel like it, why did you choose that device? I think a good way to start today is to share a story. So I'm an expert on Meshtastic. I've had it for 3.5 weeks now. And when I first got my first Meshtastic unit, I would be sitting at this house and I would see other units in the area, and I would send a message and it would say there's like a little checkbox in the Meshtastic app. Let me show you. Local host, I'm going to share our conversation. There's nothing in it besides hellos and test. But, you might get a little checkbox in there, like you see right here, which means that it was acknowledged on the mesh. And you're thinking to yourself, well, great. If it's acknowledged on the mesh, eventually it will get to the person it has to go to. And then again, if you're unaware, Meshtastic is this big ad hoc of different nodes that are able to communicate with each other. And the cool thing is all these nodes are able to also help relay messages to other nodes. So through hops, you might be able to communicate with other people. And it uses the 900 megahertz range here in the US, specifically somewhere around 906 megahertz for on license. But that's where my problem came about, because here I'm sending messages because I could see some stations. The signal quality was poor and it kept going in and out, but I could see stations. So I was thinking to myself, cool, I'll send messages, and they were all getting at least acknowledged by another node. And I'm like, that's great. That's great. I have the T1000, and that happened to be on as well, acting also as a client. So what was happening is nobody in the mesh was actually hearing my messages. My T1000 was picking up that I sent a message from the other device, and it was acknowledging that it received it. But the T1000 was never going to get to those other stations either. So I was thinking in a false sense that I was getting out of the mesh, and I'm like, why is nobody responding to me? What ended up happening was eventually I would shut the T1000 off, and then I would get the failed messages. And I think that these are very important, basically like, hey, the message didn't send. The message didn't send. And these are important lessons that we learn, because if we think we're getting out into the mesh and we're learning this now, We don't want that to happen if we ever needed to use these communications for a real world scenario. And welcome, Toby. Welcome, Taz. Good to see you, Taz. Good to see you as well, Toby. And Andy, good to see you as well. Yeah, I gave local host one of EOD Kaboom's T-beams. So spreading the joy because, and that's what I'm learning a little bit about Meshtastic. And I think that's, Meshtastic has this amazing opportunity to get people involved in ham radio, maybe unlicensed people. For example, and I'm not sharing too much, I don't think. Bodacious, welcome as well. For example, localhost is unlicensed, okay? And he's now playing with radio frequencies, and he's asking so many cool questions about antennas, and like I build him an antenna, a collinear, a COCO antenna, which we'll get to in the series. We'll build some antennas. And he's asking all these questions, and suddenly maybe you had an itch or curiosity about what amateur radio is about. Now you can start to kind of get your feet wet with RF and how it works and how there could be many daily differences, which causes signal degradation or not. And all of those things might actually promote somebody to go get their license. In fact, one moment. Dog hair. Anyway, and it might actually promote him to go get his license. And in fact, earlier today on the Mesh, he was invited to, I believe it was a ham club meeting and dinner tonight, you know? So like, what a great opportunity to communicate with unlicensed operators over a wireless thing, if you will, these wireless communications, and maybe even get them interested in radio. And if they're not interested in ham radio, they're still interested in something RF related, which I think is awesome. Before I go too far into the episode where we talk about the different node types too, I also kind of had an idea, and it kind of goes along with getting all these units in the mail. Well, I send one to localhost, or gave him one rather, because in my eyes, like I just wasn't making contact with anybody into the mesh, and I figured maybe he would be a good middle point to be able to bridge that connection. So I would send my messages, and they would hop to his messages, and then they would hop onto a gentleman who has a very good antenna and gets out a lot further. I think he links us up with most of Chicago. You know, and sometimes when we choose radios, which we will talk about in later episodes as well, we might even consider that if we start off with something inexpensive just to see what it's all about, and maybe we upgrade, maybe that's like a perfect opportunity to give it to somebody in the area who might be interested, who might be able to help the network, if you will, or the infrastructure of Meshtastic. So it's pretty interesting. Here's the concept I had. Now, I don't know how to necessarily apply this or implement this. So if anybody at Meshtastic ever, for some weird reason, sees this live stream, it would go like this. There's a Meshtastic app. In fact, I'll kind of show it to you here. I know it'll be bad because it's on the screen here. But in the Meshtastic app, there's multiple screens. There's screens that might contain all your channels, okay? There's a map screen that shows everybody in your area who might be on the mesh or that you might be hearing, okay? There is a list of all the nodes that you're hearing and how many hops you're hearing them from. And then there's your like private messages, and there's nothing in here that is private for me. But, you know, like you have your unencrypted channel and you have your encrypted channels. So a lot of people will hang out on those unencrypted channels, and it's a good place to test your equipment. If there was ever an emergency or something, maybe that's, well, depending on the circumstances, maybe that's what you broadcast out on to get some assistance. However, if you're looking for more secure comms, the structure and the principle still applies the same. And I'm going somewhere with this because even though this is an unsecured node, or this node is running an unsecured channel, we're talking unlicensed here, it could still relay messages. And so maybe you have an encrypted message, it's still going to pass along that encrypted information. Now, this is where it becomes really interesting, and I will give shout outs again in just a moment. how do you expand out the node? Like, what's the best way to do that? And when I was a kid, we used to have walkie-talkies, and those walkie-talkies, mine wouldn't get too far. I would try to be talking to the kid across the schoolyard, and I just never would make contact with him. And there was a kid in the middle who would relay the messages. We've all seen it before, like on a ham radio net, message relay. And so if my signal is too weak, maybe the guy in the middle will let the other person know what I was trying to say. To get more people in the middle, or to build the infrastructure of the ad hoc style network, wouldn't it be kind of interesting if the Meshtastic app I just showed you had a different app that was geared toward kids? And now hear me out. We don't want kids to possibly get onto channels that they might be subjected to anything that would harm them, of course, or be bad for them. But maybe the app is specifically geared toward parents setting up one encrypted channel for their kids and their kids' friends, so all their friends could be on the same encrypted network, texting and chatting with like something. They don't even need a phone. Something like the T-Deck. They could do everything on here. They could find their friend, their little GPS coordinates and everything, and they've remained secure on there because, well, it's their own channel that only their parents know the information to. Plus, if their parents ever needed to find them, they could just pop into the app and see where are the kids. Now, kids love being able to secretly communicate back and forth with each other. I mean, like when we were playing outside, it would be like cops and robbers and stuff like that too, and they could do that with this. And again, they would maintain the security because now my thought process is there would be a way that they wouldn't be able to show up on the map for anybody except that encrypted communications or encrypted channel rather. And I mean, to me, it just sounds remarkable. It's a little bit more locked down to the Meshtastic app. But all of a sudden, the more kids that start to become more interested in it, the larger out your infrastructure of Meshtastic expands. So think about that. And if I'm way off, that's cool. It was just a thought. Hey, welcome everybody. I saw Don in the chat and 5SKT, welcome. And Andy, welcome. Dad's RC Workbench. On a good day, we can link from Mexico to LA. That is amazing. I have mesh nodes out on my property for a couple of months now and not heard any other nodes. Very interesting. I'll tell you another story in just a moment. And Lionel, welcome. Nice to see you as well. So we have a solution. I finally turned, as I was mentioning whenever I started the stream 12 minutes ago, how I had two of these and one of them was acknowledging the other messages, so I was never really sending on the node. What I did is I turned that off and I still wasn't able to get onto the mesh with this device. Would try different antennas and it just wasn't cutting it. So a gentleman down the road named Gary, he recommended, hey, have you heard of the G2? And the station G2 is a very high quality receiver, as well as a little bit higher power broadcasting than maybe some of the less expensive units you would find. And I bought a G2 station and I hooked it up here to a 10 dBi antenna. I have everything working great. My link to Gary, which is around 6 miles, maybe a little more, maybe a tad less. It's like really good signal quality, typically really great signal to noise quality. I'm on the mesh. Okay. And we're going to talk about all the different types of meshes like client mute, repeat, router. I think those are the four we'll cover. But the problem, I mean, we've been communicating back and forth great since Sunday, which now allows me to have a link to localhost if I need it. And all my messages are going through with the check mark or the acknowledge. I'm excited. Things are going well. And then it happened. And this is why we need to build out the infrastructure, is because it rained last night. And this is only going to get worse as the spring comes, because not only is it going to be rain, but then the trees are going to start to fill with leaves. And when we're dealing with 900 megahertz, I know some people will say it's near line of sight. You might have even heard me say that in the past. but it is non-line of sight, or excuse me, it's line of sight. Let me just clarify. 900 megahertz is a line of sight technology. And that means that even something like, hey, there's no trees, there's no leaves on the trees right now. I have a straight shot to Gary, but all of a sudden, all the water and the moisture starts to condense onto those trees and adds a little bit more to it. Now I'm having to cut through those trees that are filled with moisture, and I lost my connection to Gary. So that kind of is a bummer. And, you know, when the leaves come, it's just going to get worse. So I need another solution. And let me just go through the chat here real quick, and we'll talk about the different node types. Now, I know that Don, is it okay if I use your general area to show on a map a list of nodes that may be available in your area? But that would be my first thing. If you're looking to, again, this is 3 weeks of mastering Meshtastic and understanding it. But if you're looking to get into Meshtastic, the first question you might have is, well, is there anybody in my area and how do I know? I have a suggestion for one thing, but the other thing is there is a mesh map, meshmap.net. I'll post it in the chat. And I believe anybody who's broadcasting MQTT protocols, it will show up on the mesh map, which is amazing. That way you know at least, hey, there's got to be somebody out here. Of course, if you're an amateur radio operator and you know how to look through for amateur radio clubs and their websites, I did last night, and I found that a local club, the 415, they have a couple of different mesh channels. They have Northern Illinois, Southern Wisconsin mesh, and then the 415 mesh channels, rather. And so I joined those, but I hadn't heard anybody talking. If I was not licensed in radio, it might be a little bit more confusing for me how to figure out where I'm supposed to find this information. And that leads to my second thought. And Don says it was okay. Thank you, Don. And that's my second thought is maybe there needs to be a database that people in the public can submit. I know people will tell me, why don't you just do it yourself? I'm used to that. Thanks. But maybe it's a database that the public can go and upload that they're part of a mesh in a general area. I also do recognize that some people who are on the meshes don't want to be known that they're on the meshes because they're trying for obscurity. And that's completely cool too. But maybe one day it'll be something like meshfinder.com. You know, you go to meshfinder.com, pull it up, look up your general area, and you see that there's maybe sometimes up to X amount of mesh nodes in your area. So let's go over to I'm going to pull up a map here. Maybe. I'm going to bring it over here so I could also see it. And we're going to start, of course, the US. And this will, in my eyes, somewhere, you know, these are kind of improv live streams, but in my eyes, this is going to lead to the different roles that your client or your node may want to be using. We're going to get into a lot of cool, you know, radio stuff. I'll show you some radios today, but we're going to dig into radios at another time, I believe. Of course, I also want to mention that if you're in the chat and you're a Meshtastic actual expert or you know more than I do, please feel free to politely interject and let us know anything that you feel would be necessary because we're learning this together. It's really kind of a fun concept. I'm having a good time doing it. Here we are at meshmap.net. Well, that's cool. Okay. Coolie, welcome. And we're going to zoom into the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And here it says that there's probably a total of, let's just say 30 nodes. I don't think we're going to go off as far as Wichita Falls, but there's probably about 30 nodes in the Dallas area. And, you know, maybe I'm out like this way, right? And MQTT tells me that there might be one node in my area. And it gives me all the information. So actually, modem preset long fast, you know, this is cool. Let me just see a couple more. I'm actually trying to answer a question of my own. These are all set up for clients, which again, we now know will receive information, but could also repeat the information, if you will. And we do see that there is some in the Dallas area, but there is also a lot of spots lacking. Like, for example, maybe this NDM1 station in Richardson somehow can relay. We'd have to find out how many miles it is to this station, and then they could jump around to the other stations. Oh, that's right. You did move. we'll roll with this one there, Don. But there's a lot of open space, especially to the what would be like the east and the southeast of the Dallas area. And you got to wonder that maybe there's a ham out here, or there's somebody out here who's trying to get out of the mesh. What do? Here we are trying to rely not on the grid. We want to be off grid, and so we need to find a way to extend this coverage out, essentially. But you might at least say, oh, okay, here in Richardson there's at least one station, so maybe I get an inexpensive unit and I see what I could see, with the knowledge of possibly having to upgrade your antenna, because antennas are really important, trying to figure out how to get your equipment higher. Now, I've been to Texas once or twice. I've been to Texas a lot. But, for example, there's a lot of flat areas in Texas. And, when you get it higher up in the air, height is very important. Height and line of sight with 900 megahertz. And so maybe you get your first unit and you're not seeing anything, but then maybe you try to go onto a mountaintop, if you can find one out here, or you go to a tall building just to see if you start to pick anything up. But my first suggestion would be the mesh map. And my second suggestion would be maybe purchasing something inexpensive just to see what is available. One moment. And, so that's a thought. But we need to make sure that we're configuring things the right way, as I'm understanding it. And that's where we kind of left off last week. We left off at, we configured our radio, our T-Beam Supreme, for the most basic settings to get us on long fast and to be able to at least connect to the mesh. And if I were to send out a test message on long fast right now, I got a little cloud. And that little cloud's like waiting to be acknowledged. So it's trying to send it. And there's a check, which means some station somewhere acknowledged my message. Hey, localhost, if you get that, would you please respond? And I'll just leave it right here. So I know now that at least right here where I'm at, even with the weather kind of still being pretty dense on the trees, I'm still able to send messages somewhere. Somebody's receiving them. And that's a good indication that I'm on the right track. I got the station G2, I got the big antenna, but I started off with the smaller units, and I was seeing some stations with the smaller units, but I was just never, you might receive a lot more stations and a lot further out than you can transmit. So that's exactly what was happening. And I think I needed that little boost with the G2 and of course the 10 dBi antenna. But my next step is going to be, and let's go ahead and pull up this awesome Meshtastic documentation, which is called Choosing the Right Device Role. Okay, and so localhost was able to confirm that he saw it, but he's not able to send out. So I know that I'm getting onto the mesh. At least somebody on long fast is seeing me, which is great. Theoretically, that message has the ability now to possibly be heard into Chicago and even further out, depending on, how many hops, of course, but depending on how many units are able to hear it and possibly rebroadcast it, which is great. Because my ultimate goal would be able to, maybe I could speak to somebody in Indiana. Maybe Carlos and I can make a contact one day. So here we are. Let's share the screen one more time. Choosing the right device role. And if you could tell me if you are unable to read that, if it needs to go a little bit bigger, it probably needs to go a little bit bigger, right? Yeah, that's cool. So to give you a little bit of knowledge, let me put myself back on the big screen real quick. This is the Meshtastic app, okay? And the Meshtastic app will, even if you have one of these keyboards, you're still going to want to use the Meshtastic app to get everything configured if you don't use your computer. It's been pointed out that, well, isn't this cell phone have connectivity to Wi-Fi and internet? And it technically it does, but it doesn't have to, right? You could still, if you have the app and you have everything ready to go, you don't need it. When I'm inside of the Meshtastic app, I could see a list of all my, I'm just making sure there's nothing private. I could see that my region is US, and I could see a list of all my different clients. Okay. And so right now I'm connected to 2540, which is my G2 unit, or my station G2, which coincidentally I named Dudes G2. If I click on the little hamburger icon on the upper right hand side of the screen, I can go to radio configuration. All those things that we saw in the last episode, a lot of the things that we saw in the last episode, I could do here. So for example, if I click on channel, here is that channel we made last week, long fast, with the encryption key set to AQ, capital A, capital Q, equals, and that's just the default key for the open public channel. So you can go and you can see a lot of that cool stuff. Another thing you could do though, is if you click on device, you can click on role, okay? And when you go on this drop down here, there's a whole list of roles that could occur. Let's talk about some of those, because that's going to be also important as to how everything is utilized. Hey, Cooley says, I have nodes meshed together in Cincy, Lexington, and Louisville. Now, I was thinking you mentioned last week, Cooley, that not too much going on the mesh by you. Is that accurate? I don't want that. There. So let's just kind of briefly run through what the different nodes are. And client node is probably going to be the most common node that we all choose to use. If you just go and you get yourself your first Meshtastic node, odds are you're going to set it up as a client role. It says here the de facto, make sure I link that. Yep. The de facto role for devices is the client role. This is a flexible general purpose role for devices which should serve the overwhelming majority use of cases. Oh, yeah, just like I mentioned a moment ago. When in doubt about using which role you should go with, simply sticking to client is the safe bet. Despite the apparent baggage of the term client in some technological context, client in Meshtastic do actually repeat and route messages. Unfortunately, in the past, this has caused some confusion, landing individuals to incorrectly choose the router role. Hey, Don, have a good one. Thanks for being here. And so, yeah, we have the client role. Again, it's probably going to work for most people, but this next role is going to be important if all of a sudden you get, I don't know, Tim, all of a sudden you get like a couple of different devices in the house. And all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm not getting on the mesh, am I? Or I know that I'm being acknowledged here to here because I text hello to long fast, the public channel, and this one receives it, but it never got out. And that's where, like, hey, if you don't need to have, if you have 15 units nearby, maybe some of them don't need to be client, and client mute might be the better option for you. Client mute role is similar to the client role, but with one key difference. It does not repeat or route messages. This role is ideal for devices that are intended to be used in areas with high network traffic where additional message routing could cause congestion. And that is another thing to consider. And actually, I see the point now. So just like anything else, when you're using this much bandwidth and this much actual bandwidth, like when you're trying to push all that data through this much bandwidth and there's just an overload, it's going to create congestion. By using the client mute role, you can ensure that the device will only send and receive its own messages without contributing to network traffic. So maybe that doesn't actually fix my issue. This role is highly recommended if you are a mesh enthusiast with multiple devices. Oh, okay. Select one of your devices to be a client and set the rest to client mute. All of a sudden you have several, maybe that's a better way to explain it. All of a sudden you have several different devices, or maybe 8 or 20 different devices that you somehow acquired, and you send a message, hello world, on long fast, and all of a sudden all 20 of those different nodes are trying to rebroadcast it, creating a network congestion issue. You bottlenecked the network. Okay, and let me just finish that last sentence. Select one of your devices to be client and set the rest to client mute. I think it's important that we kind of go over at least the next two as well, because everything I just mentioned leads up to where I'm going. And we talked about how now all of a sudden I get rain, and localhost is saying the same thing. And we're no longer able to communicate through the mesh as well. Well, I have access to a 284-foot tower, and I have hardline, the thick hardline, the I can't say it, so whatever. I have the thick hardline that runs down the towers, and I have a 900 megahertz antenna at 100 feet and probably one at, I think, 95 feet. So what role am I going to use? And I think that this is going to answer our questions. The router role is designed for devices which are intended to primarily route messages to other devices on the mesh. Okay. This role is only suitable for stationary devices placed in extremely strategic locations to act as an unofficial hub for routing packets on the mesh. Routers focus on relaying messages from other devices by cutting in line. I'm sorry if that's bothering y'all, if I'm highlighting it. Routers focus on relaying messages from other devices by cutting in line before other nodes have the chance to rebroadcast a message, making them key for extending the range and reliability of your mesh. Additionally, routers always rebroadcast, whereas most others potentially choose to forego rebroadcasting if they hear a neighbor rebroadcasting first. Oh, the map, let me just mark where I was at, is meshmap.org. .net, meshmap.net. Another default behavior of routers is that the device tries to save as much power as possible by attempting to sleep as well as send telemetry packets less frequently than other devices on the mesh. This is because they are chiefly tasked with routing others' traffic rather than originating their own messages. Ham Without a Plan says, so think of routers like repeaters. And let's read the role of a repeater, and I'm gonna let you answer that if you are able to, because it might help us all out. The repeater role behaves very similar to a router in terms of becoming a preferred device for routing packets. However, it goes a step further by completely turning off any broadcasted traffic such as telemetry. It only responds to other node packets instead of originating messages. What is strategic location anyway? This is important because here I am, I want to put something on a tower, but is the tower going to be considered a strategic location? And I'm hoping that I can, with the permission of the building owner, I'm hoping that we can go inside the building, go up into the area where all the equipment's going to be located, and be able to hook everything up. And I'm hoping to be able to do that on a live stream maybe, or even just record a video. What is a strategic location anyway? When evaluating strategic locations for the two roles, consider a tower on a mountain peak rather than on a tall building. By electing a device to become a router or repeater, you are making an implicit choice for the entire mesh to prefer that node for rebroadcasts for any direct neighbors. This strategic placement becomes crucial for ensuring that packets can be delivered to the widest possible audience. Using line of sight viewshed survey tools to determine the optimal location is recommended, but selection can be best determined by collecting some real-world data on the mesh first. That's a good meme. Why improperly applying a router? And I know that most people could read this, but I think it's really fun to be able to hear input as well. So why improperly applying router and repeater rules is harmful? If a poor location is chosen for routers and repeaters, it can cause a number of issues. Increased rate of packet collisions. Because routers and repeaters always rebroadcast, when too many devices are applied with these roles, the devices are direct neighbors. Packets will potentially be rebroadcasted at the same time, creating a higher noise level and packet error rates. This frequently culminates in sporadic delivery failures. Decreased overall range. An improperly located router will potentially prematurely hop-gobble any packets routing through it. This has the effect of consuming a hop in the routing of a packet before it would be able to reach the more strategically located nodes. I guess what I was thinking earlier was happening when I said I had those two nodes and I would send out and I would say I was acknowledged, but I never actually hit the mesh, is even though it was trying to it wasn't hop gobble. It just neither of the devices had enough to reach the mesh itself. But inadvertently, what I was doing at that point was I was congesting the mesh. And that is why, if we go back to my earlier idea about getting every kid a Meshtastic device so that they could chat with their friends, might actually hinder the performance of the Meshtastic network. So now we know. That's pretty cool. So we'll potentially prematurely hop gobble any packets routing through it. This has the effect of consuming a hop in the routing of a packet before it would be able to reach a more strategically located node, and this can greatly limit range. For instance, in the case of many routers being deployed in a valley, consuming all the very available hops before a packet is able to reach its destination through a more strategically node placed on a peak above the valley, maybe strategic, a more strategic node placed on the peak above the valley. I don't necessarily want to go over all of the different node types. However, there are a couple of really cool ones that I'm really looking forward to playing with. And that's the fun of this too, is like, even if you're not licensed in amateur radio, there's a lot of cool things that you could do for testing. There's the sensors, but the tracker role is really what I like. And there's also one called Lost and Found. But the tracker role is designed for devices that are primarily used for tracking the location of assets, vehicles, or individuals. Devices in this role periodically send their GPS coordinates to the network via position packets, with a higher priority allowing for a more robust location tracking. Trackers still participate in the routing of messages, but their main goal is to provide timely location data, even in the face of high channel utilization. Think about this. A tracker, or I believe there's another one called Lost and Found. All of the sudden, yeah, Errol, welcome, buddy. Nice to see you. It really is good to see you. And WUZ, thanks for showing up too. So the tracker, and then I believe there's a Lost and Found client type as well, could be utilized very good for search and rescue operations. Or, and I've heard of this, I think it's a really cool use case. I'll probably do it with Chuck. You can get some Meshtastic devices that are relatively small. Let's go over to the table real quick. And before we do that though, do you have any questions? A lot of the stuff we talked about today might start to, and we will dig into the actual equipment sooner rather than later, or later, just depends on how these streams go. But a lot of the stuff we talk about may have an impact on how you choose or what you choose to buy for your first mesh or for your first node. So let's, I'm going to change a couple things up here. I'll be right back. You have 100 nodes? Are you kidding? Be right back. Now, do you really have 100 nodes? I only have this many. Yeah, that's going to be good. But let's take into consideration a few things we spoke about just a moment ago. Let's start off with the one I was just speaking about, which is that case of lost and found. Now, maybe if you're doing lost and found, you don't really need a keyboard. You don't need anything like that. And maybe you have, I actually just found this in my drawer of stuff. And I'm like, oh, cool. I think I could flash this into a Meshtastic node. This is a Heltec. This one's a version 2, but the version 3 does USB-C. Regardless, look how small it is. And I got to imagine that even with a battery, you could 3D print a case that's only a little bit thicker than this device. Come on. Yeah, okay. Hold on, let's flip that around. Yeah. Where am I going with this? Well, if I had a dog leash, or if I wanted to put this on a, well, I got to be careful how I say this here. If I wanted to put this on one of my kids that I don't have's backpack, maybe the smaller non-conspicuous unit might be a better option, especially for like a dog leash, because I could picture the case having 2 grooves for the dog leash to go through, and then this just sits on the dog leash like, at least like my dog wears. And then he walks around or whatever, and then maybe at night I have to recharge it. So that's a possibility. You know, but then again, maybe this isn't the best device for other things, or maybe you want to look into other options. And these are just the thoughts that I'm seeing, by the way, as I progress into going zero to hero. I'm not going to talk about them all. I'll show them off if you want, but this one is really unique because now we were talking a minute ago about, it didn't switch. 1 second. And local host says they already make small cases for printables. Printables.com if you have a 3D printer. But now this one's a really unique. This is a metal case. It's got GPS. It's got your antenna. It's got a button to turn it on and off, but it's also covered. Okay, and your USB-C charging is also covered. So the use case for this and what I was thinking would be, it could be a client, of course. It could be pretty much anything you might want it to be, but this might also be really good for that lost and found kind of mode or the tracker mode. Because if I'm hiking on a mountain and I fall into the water, I don't want to say that this is waterproof without knowing fully, but this has probably a lot more waterproof capability than something less expensive that might be 3D printed, right? And so this is called the Mesh Radio Rugged US 915. So there's a use case for that too. where I'm going with that is we do see a lot of inexpensive nodes on the market, both pre-built as well as you can make them yourself. But there are other nodes out there for specific use cases. Earlier, I was talking about a concept that might not actually be the best concept. And that was, maybe you give these to some locals who want to text their buddies and stuff. And all of a sudden they have like their own little mesh network, but they're also contributing to the overall mesh. Now I know possibly congestion may become an issue because if they kicked off with the kids, it wouldn't be great. However, where I'm going with this, and the T-Deck in particular just got a new firmware upgrade. I think Josh Ham Radio Crash Course posted something, and it has a really nice new user interface, and it allows for like these map imports, which, yeah, we're going to take a look at all that too. But maybe a T-Deck is for somebody who doesn't want to always be by their phone or doesn't have a phone, and maybe they still want to be able to text on the mesh. And this would probably be a good job. Now, I think it's important to mention, you could easily, like we kind of showed off in that first episode, buy all the parts to build your own. You would need a GPS still. You would need a battery. You would need a case. And for that price, you'd probably be in it around $110 or so. I don't know exactly. Or you could then you'd have to flash everything yourself. Or, they do have, again, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. They do have pre-built ones as well. So this one was made by Spec 5. I purchased it at Hamvention, and essentially they do the same thing. Now I show off these ones today. Sorry, it's like it's a reach today. I don't know why. That's a little better. I show off these ones today because if you're looking for a repeater, maybe this is overkill for a repeater, right? Maybe for a repeater, if you're going to be on a mountaintop with it, or even a router, maybe you're going to be on a mountaintop and maybe there's no power up there. So maybe you need to look at something else. And, maybe you wouldn't want the keyboard. Maybe you go with something like this, but now you have to start to consider more options for things like solar power. How are you going to power the thing on a mountaintop where there's no power potentially? I'm getting there. I got to find it. I think this is called the Spec 5 beacon. We're going to tear this apart in a couple of weeks. See what's inside because I'm really curious. But what you see and what you notice is you got your antenna port. You have a screen on the front, which displays information. You have a button on the side to turn on the power. Maybe not a waterproof case, but there is the potential for, it does solar charging, right? So it extends the battery range on here. Maybe if you're out camping for a couple of days, it's not going to rain. Maybe you put this up on a high spot so you have a little bit better coverage for your mesh. Or maybe you're somewhere and you need to have better. Okay, let's use Hamvention's coming up. Maybe you throw this on a high spot at Hamvention, right? It extends it extends the battery life because there is a battery in here. There's solar charging, and it's just ready to go. But we're going to tear this apart. We'll probably build our own just for fun as well, kind of get an idea how both work. I guess where I'm trying to start us thinking about and going is there's going to be a lot of different devices for different use cases. I'm going to take a break and read the comments real quick. You have to be careful. Sorry, 1 second. Jeff says you have to be careful on the tower of the antenna. It's mounted directly to the PC board. Or you want to be the cool kid that has the T-Deck, not tower T-beam. Oh, I am the cool kid with the T-beam. The Taco Bell Supreme. But also you might be thinking of the T-beam like this one right here. So this is a Spec 5. I don't know what the name of this one is. Maybe the Ranger or something like that. This one is internally, it's a T-beam, which is another device that you could buy all the parts and build it yourself, but there is a convenience factor of just having this here with a nice belt clip, a cool little stand. And one of the things I really am looking forward to open this one up, though, is I noticed the SMA port is loose. And I think that we could fix that. I don't think it was anything from the company, so I don't want anybody to think I'm putting them down. But you know, if you run the wrong way or you hit your antenna the wrong way, you can see what happens there. Maybe it's a little bit bent. So I'm going to see if we can't open that up, see what's inside, what's going on. That'll be a fun little fix video. As far as my driving in my car, I like this only because it's like really small, and I can probably going to get some magnets here. As we mentioned earlier, Molly gear goes on here, and I have a lot of Molly gear spots on my vehicle to mount this to, which I probably will end up doing. But for right now, I just used the elastic strap, and I strap it to the oh shit handles on the vehicle. So these are all clients in my eyes. However, if you had leave those there for a second. If you had a magnetic rooftop, they even make nodes. We'll go further into these, but they even make nodes that have the magnetic capability on the bottom. Pop it on, screw it in, and then, of course, your power would go right here en route to your vehicle. So there's something for everybody, and you would have to kind of analyze what your use case is going to be, and I would recommend starting from there. Maybe number one is to start with something inexpensive and buy it just to see what's in your area. Drive around, find high spots, see if you receive anything, and then from there understand what your use case is going to be. If you're hiking places and you need reliable things, look for more rugged solutions. If you're just going to be using it around town, you know, your local clubs, maybe all these are fine. You know, I'm not going to say which one's best yet. We'll figure those out along the way. Because even like this little health tech here, I mentioned maybe putting it on a dog leash, and I guess there's files on printables, but this is also just a health tech, and it has a nice little case on it too. So we could put a battery in here and we can get this rocking as well. A nice little portable unit, right? There are a few more. My goal wasn't necessarily to go into radios today, but really talk about the different kind of nodes. And I think we kind of accomplished that. And excuse me, sorry for that. And of course, after we get to look at all the radios, then the next thing is looking at all the different types of antennas. And I've been slowly purchasing all these different antennas so that I should probably zoom out a little bit. Yeah, that works. I've been slowly purchasing all these different antennas so that we can kind of try to do a comparison. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go across town. I'll have somebody here, and we will try to communicate back and forth with each antenna to see what the receive signal is and if we can successfully transmit a message. That should give us an idea if this antenna is any better than this antenna. This is a good antenna, by the way. And I think that we'll eventually get there. We're just kind of taking it day by day. Let me go back to the main screen here. Oh, your solar unit is meshed with 100 nodes. That's amazing. I only own 7. I only own 7 meshed nodes. That's awesome. In fact, here's a Heltic case with an 18650 battery slot, which I have. And then the Heltic goes here and it's USB-C here. So I already have a case if I wanted to build one. We will build it. Let me go back to the main desk here, though. Oh, wait. I have a Station G2, which I'll show off at a later date, that I plan on using for the repeater or router, depending on what, on the tower. But right now it's hooked up here. I'm getting another one on Friday. And I just don't want to unplug the one that I'm using now. I'm going to try to successfully send another message in the mesh. But that is a very nice unit for a router or a repeater because, and one of the things that I think is important to mention is the power consumption on that requires, because it has a external PA, it requires 15 volts DC. Now, yeah, don't get me wrong. You could hook up a battery 15 volts DC. You could figure it out, right? But your power consumption is you're going to kill that battery a lot quicker. And if you're just using it for driving around town, it might not be the most optimal thing in the world. But on a repeater site, a tower, even at home as a repeater or router, or even a client, maybe that's a good solution. Something like this LilyGo here, I haven't played with this too much, but my research shows me that these are really difficult to see at nighttime. So you have to consider all these things. Nighttime's operation. When am I going to be using this? How am I going to be utilizing it? And I think that that's where we're going and continuing to go. Whoa. G2 can do full power at 12 volts. Oh, I must have read that wrong. Well, that's awesome. There we go. All right, let me go through the red cases at 6 dB. Yo, and I appreciate y'all being here. Now, I just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. I'll go through the comments here real quick. And like I said, we're kind of going through this together. I do hope that today is a step further in understanding what Meshtastic is. And we have to kind of know these different roles if we ever wanted to use it. Now, one thing I'll explain, and I'm going to explain this in a way that some people might not enjoy or appreciate, but it's the best way I know how. And when you have a firearm and you're depending on that firearm for your life or potentially to save your life, you don't just go to the store and buy the firearm and put it on the shelf and then or walk around with it without ever test firing it, right? You go to the range, you get proficient with it, you put rounds through it, you learn as much as you can about it so that when the time comes where you may have to use it, you're proficient and confident enough in your abilities to do so. And that's kind of what we're doing here. We're building it up. And that's also what the Meshtastic network should be like. So, getting on that network and just shooting out a hello or good morning. I know that I've seen some really cool stuff on my network, which has been like a daily trivia thing coming out of Chicago. And people just ask a daily trivia, which kind of gives a little bit of, it's a good conversation starter, if you will, but it also helps you understand how the network is routing and maybe possibly where some of your weak points are so you can analyze them, change whatever you have to change and adapt. And that's kind of what I'm saying by knowing what your use case is going to be for this. Now, I could tell you all day long, like, you should get this one, this is the best, and you should get that one, and this is the best. But at the end of the day, it depends on your use case, right? And I don't think you'll hear, I don't know, I haven't watched a lot of Meshtastic videos, but I don't think you'll hear a lot of people telling you that you need to determine what the best device is going to be for the scenarios that you may expect yourself to be in. Hydrate. We will look more into the nodes. So we're going to go through every one of those nodes. I thought node types was very important. We'll look through every one of those nodes. I think that we're just going to end up going, there's not much to nodes too, by the way. Once you understand how one node works, whether it's a LilyGo or it's a Station G2, for the most part, everything kind of works out. It's just like a firearm, right? Like if you know how to use one pistol, the dynamics may be essentially the same depending on the type, right? But there might be a few small differences also. And I think it's important for us just to consider that. So the G2 can do full power at 12 volts. That's amazing. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Rack uses less power. And that's another good thing to know. I don't know that I have any rack devices. So I'll go through all these and find, what is it called? The Wisp block? Echo has a backlight. It does have a backlight. Okay, cool. We're going to take a look at that. We'll turn off the lights in here and stuff like that. I think I may be looking at some of this stuff at the Sandwich Ham Fest. My ground elevation here is 960, a high point in the area. Whoa. Oh, wait. WUZ. Wait, you don't need to look for anything. When I see you at the fest, or if you want to see me beforehand, get a hold of me offline. You know how to get a hold of me. And I got you taken care of, buddy. That's all I could do because of my EOD buddy. Let's give a shout out to my EOD buddy. Not fragile like a flower, fragile like a, I can't say that word or I'll get shadow banned again. He has donated enough of these that we can continue to build up the area, but also at the same time educate everybody in the community, which I think is awesome. Yes to the backlight. Dog Booyah. I think I might have seen never mind. Thanks for being here today. Yeah, that's awesome. I just love the concept of this mesh growing, and I think it'll be really cool. Again, I want to reiterate another point that I made today, that all this unlicensed radio frequency stuff does have the potential to bring unlicensed. Is there anybody here unlicensed? One in the chat if you're unlicensed, because it has the ability to, if anything, get people interested in radio frequencies and STEM and the maker space and that nerd stuff, but maybe potentially somebody being interested in amateur radio. Wait, you got to do that? And yeah, it's awesome. I really appreciate you. If you meet me, you will know stealth is not for me. All right. So with that, the circle stuff, I'm going to look into the circle stuff. I want to look into ATAC, hydrate or dihydrate. That's right, hydrate. So with that, you can get this stuff to mesh together. Okay, see, yeah, we got at least one person here who's unlicensed, and I welcome you, and I hope that at the end of the day, regardless, like you just find some kind of interest in Meshtastic and this series helps you. But if you are ever interested in radio stuff, just know that there's a lot of cool guys here who are, this community specifically is being built to make sure that we are kind of all on the same page. We're all the same mindset. We all want to help others. So feel free to ask any questions that you might have. Welcome, Justin. And that's the truth. Don says, just remember that big telco is coming into the 915 megahertz space. The FCC already let them in. Is that for official that they're going to take it over? We'll have to do some research on that. I think it's time to say 73s. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's been about an hour. We're going to cut it at an actual hour today. And I hope you all have a good one. So Nunya, thanks a lot. Maple trees to tap. Oh, that sounds good. Send them my way. I want some syrup. Have a good one. 73 to you. And we're going to do our 73 round. So do me a favor and let me know in the comments below. I'll read it. Are you already interested? Are you already involved in Mesh? And if you're not, are you becoming more interested in Meshtastic? Let me know and we'll say 73s. So with that, 73 to you, Jeff. 73 Rick, thanks for being here, Rick. You must have snuck in. They are going to be deploying it. Okay, localhost, thanks for being here. And MI7DJT, thanks for being here. IC333, thanks for being here. Allegedly not a takeover, but 915 will be impossible. I think Meshtastic uses 906 megahertz, so we'll see how that goes. All right, 73 Rick and 73 Lee, thanks for being here. And hey, Chuck, they all say hi. You want to come here real quick? Come here. Come here. 73 Anunya, 73 Andy. And Jeff's already caught the mesh bug. Hey, can you come here? Can you come here? See if we can get you on the camera. No? Nope. I promise you, he's right here and he's a good boy. You want to come up here? Come on. See, you got to come up here. I don't know if you all got to see him at all, but he says hello. All right, already caught the mesh, and 73 made the live stream. Thanks a lot for being here, Troy. Appreciate it. And Mesh Core is very interesting. Yeah, this is getting cooler and cooler every time we read more and more. 73 Toby and localhost says I need a separate dog cam, or I need a separate dog cam. You're absolutely right. Hold that thought. going to work today. Okay, I'll get a dog cam. I have the camera here ready to go. So we're good. We're good. Dog cam next time. 73, I don't have mesh, but my nearest mesh node is 20 miles away. Depending on, all these things we were talking about today, like your line of sight, how high you might be able to get your mesh node, 20 miles might be possible. The longest recorded communication on mesh directly is 200 miles, I believe it was. 73. And thanks for being here all. And Happy Ham 73. South Coast, Massachusetts is barren as far as mesh goes. And Don, thanks for the link here. We're going to take a look at that next time we start up. I'll do my best to remember. And we'll read a little bit about the 915 takeover. Y'all take care. Have a good one. And 73.